Regarding Men, episode 57, Worldwide Pandemic, Women Most Affected. Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to episode 57 of Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard. And I'm joined by Tom Golden and Paul Elam, and we are talking about the coronavirus, but just one aspect of the way it's being reported. Now, on March 6th, our friend, Peter Lloyd, happened to tweet out a question to his Twitter followers. How long before the headline, Coronavirus, Women Most Affected? He had a little poll, said things like 4 hours, 8 hours, 2 days, and get lost, you bigot. And guess what? The answer was just a few hours. The very next day, The Lancet came out with an article entitled The Gendered Coronavirus, the Gendered Impacts of the Outbreak. And that article told us that infection rates are about equal, but men tend to die more often. In fact, it seemed that the numbers indicated a quite startling discrepancy, that significantly higher numbers of men were dying than women. But it quickly went on to say we don't know exactly why. It may be because Asian men tend to smoke a lot more, therefore compromising their immune system and opening them to the possibility of pneumonia, which is one of the serious side effects of the virus. So anyway, but after making that point, it left men behind altogether. And it had a sentence saying, recognizing the extent to which disease outbreaks affect women and men differently is a fundamental step to understanding the primary and secondary effects of a health emergency on different individuals and communities. Okay, that sounds pretty anodyne. I don't argue with that. Sure, let's see how it affects women, how it affects men, therefore we can get a rounded picture. But guess what? The whole rest of the article never mentions men.
No.
Only talks about the way that women are impacted.
No.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah, I know. You guys are just going to fall over, right?
Read that right, Janice?
Yeah. So the rest of that article talks about the way women are impacted. Then there was another article pretty much picking up from that Lancet article by the BBC, another very trustworthy, unbiased news source. Its title was Coronavirus, 5 Ways Virus Upheaval is Hitting Women in Asia. This was on March the 8th, I guess, to coincide with International Women's Day. And so it goes through various areas, including school closures, migrant workers, domestic violence, and the economic impacts, all of which supposedly affect women more, or at least that we should be more concerned about the impacts on women. And again, it focuses entirely on women's suffering. Not a word about what men are enduring. So I guess nobody is particularly surprised, because we know that whatever it is, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's some kind of economic downturn, whether it's, as we say, an asteroid hitting the earth, it's always women who are most affected. As Hillary Clinton told us in 1998, I think that was at a talk that she gave in El Salvador, it is women who have always been the primary victims of war because they lose their husbands and their sons. So there we have it.
Can't make this shit up.
No, Paul Elam speechless for the first time in 10 years. I mean, it is.
It's longer than that, Janice. I was reminded when you brought up Hillary Clinton, and this is true story here. I forget what year was it, 2007, that the tsunami hit Phuket and killed all those. It was such a horrible thing. I was listening on the radio to Tammy Bruce's show, And Tammy Bruce is now, I mean, she's widely accepted. She's a former, some type of feminist and from the left, but she's made a bit of a conversion. And now you see her on Tucker Carlson all the time and other more conservative programming. But back then when that happened, she talked about, well, more women died because the men ran off and left them. That was her logic.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely unthinkably stupid.
And she had all the facts to back it up in that statistics,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. That the men survived because they ran off and left the women to die.
That's right.
When they all had, what, 12 seconds notice
Oh,
of what was that, before everything was literally wiped out.
wiped out.
And this article, the BBC, the Lancet, none of this surprises me. I think Peter was right on the mark with his prediction.
Yeah.
He knew that it would come out, and I can promise you that more articles, as this time goes by. One of the things that the article mentioned was that most healthcare workers are female, 70 some odd % of them, apparently, according to one of the articles. And of course, if 70% of healthcare workers were men, that would be a cause to complain about the imbalance, the gender imbalance in the field, because men get all the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now that it's all women, well, then it's not fair because they're at more risk. So no matter what you do, these people, it's the same thing every time. And this is honestly, I mean, I'm sort of laughing about it. I thought what Peter did was humorous and everything. And at the same time, I'm totally disgusted by the fact that some gender ideologues are so crazy about their ideas and their views that they'll latch onto a worldwide disaster like this in order to politicize it and to make it about gender politics, when we're trying to just find answers to this and everybody's trying to stay safe and stay alive.
Absolutely.
It's pretty pathetic.
It really is. It's so pathetic. And, you know, it's one of these areas they talk about they talk about the entirety of society in various Asian countries that have been impacted by the virus and make all these generalizations as if, I mean, really, it is as if men's humanity is completely obliterated in the minds of these writers. It's just astounding. I mean, there's the first one that they talk about, school closures, which supposedly horribly impacts women because women are the primary caregivers for children. And they do make the point, Paul, that exactly the point that you just made, that this is because most Asian countries have made very poor progress towards gender equality. And so this is an example of it. And so here's the example they give. They interview a woman named Ms. Sung. And she says that she's finding it difficult. She does have a job, but she's having to stay home from that job in order to look after the kids who are home from school. She says, to be honest, I want to go into the office because I can't really focus at home. But my husband is the breadwinner and he can't really ask for time off. And she goes on, the article goes on. Ms. Sung, her 11-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son spend their days playing games and watching films.
Oppression.
While the husband works,
while the husband is
exposed to risk.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what do you say about that? I mean, I'm sure they're all stressed. This sounds like just an ordinary family, and yeah, the mom is staying at home. They're playing games and watching films on TV. I'm sorry, that does not sound like the most horrific form of gender oppression that one could imagine. Meanwhile, yes,
risking infection at work.
Yeah, you know, if she were the one having to go into work every day and her husband was staying home with the children and they were playing games and watching films, would that be reported as an instance of his extreme unjust suffering?
Yep.
You know, and every single one of the examples that is given is like that, and it's presented in such a way that you know, one just asks the question, well, yeah, okay, so what about the men? There's a big section on migrant workers and how supposedly, according to this article, most migrant workers are female domestics. Well, that is simply not true. I mean, although, I mean, it's certainly not an area of expertise of mine, but I've done a little bit of work on Afghani men who work as migrant workers in Iran, for example, and they are treated terribly. Their living conditions, their working conditions, they are treated as people with no rights at all. They're looked down
Slaves.
upon. They're terribly abused. It's awful. And there are millions of them in Iran doing horrible, dangerous, dirty, awful work. I mean, you know, the sheer dishonesty of these articles is astounding.
And that's the red pill's perspective, is we see it as dishonesty because we know that's the case. But I think in their minds, they're telling you the truth because that's what they believe. I mean, if you look at the whole moral typecasting thing, I mean, that says that we're going to see women as the victims and men as the perpetrators. And this is why people, when most people, millions of people read that article, they're not saying, oh, there's something wrong with this. They're going, poor women.
And they're
that's
attracted
their
to
nature.
that.
What's that?
Yeah, they're attracted to that.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, this is where people are. This is literally the blue pill is thinking in those lines.
Yeah.
And we think it's crazy because we've seen a different way to look at things, you know, but these people are just, they're just doing what they think is the right thing.
Yeah, guess
You know?
so. I mean,
And
wow.
it just absolutely stuns me because
Yes.
I lived most all of my life in Texas, where we have a large migrant population there. Much of it out in the fields, picking fruit in blistering heat, in horrible working conditions. And yes, there are women migrants who come in and they clean rooms in hotels and they're housemaids, but these are generally people on the female end that sleep with a roof over their head, sleep and work in safer conditions. The men, migrant fruit pickers, a lot of times sleep in ditches and lucky to have a blanket to put over them at night. And that's the condition down there. That's what's actually going on. But if you have reporters went down there to cover migrants, they would find some woman in a hotel room cleaning out toilets, and they would write a story about how difficult her life is and how little money she makes and how little she gets for her efforts. Meanwhile, her husband is breaking his back in the fields.
But that's what sells papers.
Yes, it is. That's what people want to hear.
That's what they want to hear because that's what fits with their mental framework of everything. That's what they've got. That's what they think.
And even worse,
this is what we're fighting against.
They'll write articles about machismo in Hispanic culture and how oppressive it is of women. And these guys are working, they're getting paid crap to begin with. And what little they're getting paid, they don't even spend on themselves. They send it back to Mexico.
Right.
Women and children.
All that machismo.
Yes, all that power and privilege that they write about. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it really is maddening. I mean, again, it reminds me of that wonderful article by Glenn Poole that he published, many years ago now, called The Empathy Gap, where he talked about reporting on these issues and how when men or boys are suffering or are killed, they are simply reported as people because the fact that they are male does not arouse empathy. It is not of interest. It is not a story. Whereas when women and girls suffer, that is a story. Everybody needs to know that it was women who were killed or girls. And, men, of course, their sex is identified usually when they're perpetrating violence or doing something wrong. So that anything that might provoke empathy for men is occluded anything that will provoke the response of disliking men or associating them with violence and criminality, that is emphasized. I mean, it's really quite something. I was doing a bit of research into like this whole meme now that everything, in any natural disaster, it's women who are most effective. Global warming supposedly affects women. And, this is now all the feminist research focuses on all of these differential gendered impacts. And I came across just one example of the kind of sleight of hand, and it is so maddening. I was reading an article about the link between natural disasters and violence against women. And it's in a left-wing academic journal called The Conversation. And there's an article that said its title was "Domestic Violence Will Spike in the Aftermath of the Bushfires." This was about the Australian bushfires. And one of the first sentences is, "Disasters have gendered impacts. Generally, disasters disproportionately affect women and girls." Well, we've all heard that before, right? And then listen to this, with women and children 14 times more likely to die in a natural disaster on a global scale. So, and there was a link there. I went to the link, and the link says that women, boys, and girls are 14 times more likely than men to die during a disaster. Completely unhelpful statistic, because of course we don't know what percentage. Exactly. I mean, it makes sense that children are highly likely to be harmed and to die in natural disasters because they're so helpless. And they lump women in there. We don't know what proportion the women are. Obviously, if the statistic had looked at how many had put men plus boys plus girls, they would all as a group be more likely to die than women. So you could make the same kind of claim. It would never be made. And I thought it was fascinating that children, by a nice sleight of hand, became girls only when it was reported in the primary article, even though the statistic clearly identified children as including, as it does, both boys and girls, but the boys got left out when the statistic was reported. I mean, you couldn't have a clearer instance of the feminist determination to erase the fact of men's suffering than that. And yet that goes on over and over and over again in all of this kind of reporting. And we're just flooded with it day in and day out.
It's true.
It's also interesting that you brought up the fires in Australia as an example. There's been a good many of the firefighters out there have died in the process of trying to put those fires out. There was several Americans recently that lost their lives that had gone to Australia, all of them male.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that are beating their wives?
Yeah. Yes, they probably leave the scene of the fire to go home to beat their wives if they live long enough.
Yeah, if they live long
exactly.
enough. Yeah.
And we can say at the end of that women are most affected.
Yeah, I know it's.
But I do think we have to look honestly. I mean, it's one thing. I know there's a lot of ideologues in the press, in what we loosely call the press these days, loosely called journalists. But there's also, this is what the appetite is for society.
That's it.
They don't. If you put a headline about men suffering or something, who would read it?
Nobody.
Nobody would care.
Yep.
You can't sell papers. You can't sell clicks on the idea of men as victims.
So who gets the privilege there, Paul?
Oh, men, of course.
Men, of course. Men are privileged. Yeah, that's what somebody I posted. I posted the BBC article, and it does have a beautiful picture accompanying it of a very attractive young woman with a face mask, and she's carrying a little child, and she's rushing somewhere, and it's a very attractive image of women being both heroic, but also being victims and deserving our empathy and our admiration. Anyway, and so I posted that and made a kind of mocking comment about, here it is again, coronavirus, women most impacted. And someone wrote under it right away, this is the patriarchy, eh? Every single story, day in and day out, is about our concern for women. It's not a very effective patriarchy, is it? It's always highlighting, yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, this is the blatant contradiction. What kind of a patriarchy is it? It's supposed to be oppressing and subjugating and exploiting women for men's advantage and men's pleasure. Regarding men, what kind of patriarchy is it? 57, completely worldwide pandemic, the humanity and the concerns and needs and suffering of men, and constantly worries over the impacts on women. Clearly not
and
a
then
very
they have the
effective
audacity to say patriarchy hurts men too.
yeah.
Like it seems to me like that's pretty much all
it ever does. Yeah.
Oh God, so true though, Janice. Well said.
Yeah. It's quite something, really. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Well, one thing I can count on though, that because of the patriarchy, if I do get coronavirus, I'll get first place in the hospital. I'll get the benefit of all the medications, and the medical care will all come to me because of my, no, wait a minute, that's women.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are you talking
wait a minute. Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Somebody also tweeted under that article that I posted about how, the coronavirus needs to have implicit bias training, because clearly if it's impacting women more, it didn't realize that it, shouldn't do that.
That's a good point. It needs bias.
That is a very
training.
good point.
Yeah. These damn viruses, they're biased.
Damn them.
Bias virus.
Yeah.
Virus bias.
Yeah, virus bias.
Yeah.
They're really, it is so true. That joke, everywhere you look, the determination that only women's concerns will ever be highlighted. It couldn't be clearer. I don't see how you could read a newspaper today and not see that. You don't have to be an anti-feminist. You don't have to be red-pilled. You just have to be an ordinary human being who cares about men. And yet, as you say, this is what gets written and read, often with approval, and people think, I'm going to mention that if the coronavirus conversation comes up, I'm going to be able to talk about the specific ways that women are impacted.
Yeah.
And
I'm convinced these people simply do not have eyes to see it. They simply cannot see it. These are very bright people sometimes. People are well-read who have, extremely intelligent, and they literally cannot see it. They won't see it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the frustration of the red pill.
It sure is.
What?
Yeah.
What? You can't see that? No, you're a bigot,
Yeah.
That's what you get. You get back that you're a bigot and an MRA and go away.
Yeah, it's like
the virus is a bigot.
That's right.
Yeah. Once you have had your eyes opened, the sense of alienation, just the weirdness of living in the culture that we have created, it can sometimes be mind-boggling.
And this is exactly why we're building Regarding Men to be a site where people can get together.
Yeah.
Because there's so much isolation. There's so much people going, what? You can't understand that? And it separates people from their families, from the people they worked with. It's like it leaves people very isolated.
Yeah, you begin to doubt yourself. You think, am I paranoid? Am I seeing things that aren't there? Why doesn't anybody else see this? Why do I get so much hostility in response when I merely raise something that seems so obvious to me, to any thinking person?
Yes.
Yeah,
we're working on it.
Yeah, definitely.
We're getting there slowly, but slowly.
Well, as a result of your hard work, Tom, it's going to be a really great site for people to form community and talk about these things.
Yes, public kudos to Tom Golden for that. Yeah. He's done a huge amount of work on building Regarding Men site.
It functions well.
And if it doesn't, we'll remind them that it was you that built it.
Yeah.
That's only fair.
Yeah.
Oh God, are we finished?
Yeah, I think so.
I nominate the PUTA for the journalism field entirely.
Mhm.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
For whipping people
Me
into a
too.
frenzy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we didn't even talk
Yeah,
about
we
drugs
didn't even
much.
get into that
Yeah.
because but what I'm seeing that really distresses me is in the United States, the way the left is trying to gin up hysteria
Yes.
in
Yes.
order to make the president look bad.
I know, it's really sad.
It's awful.
They're willing to sell people down the chute, have people die, have the economy go bad, just so their desire is to have Trump get kicked out. I mean, it's like, that's just sick.
Well, the means justifies the end. I'm sure they believe in that
They
case.
do believe
if
that.
it
It does
means
seem
that
like
the
that.
entire economy collapses and people lose their life savings or lose their businesses or whatever, that's okay.
We'll get rid of Trump.
Yeah, if we could get rid of Trump, that would justify everything.
And the mentally sharp and ever intelligent Joe Biden will get us out of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's another discussion.
On that note, let's get the hell out of here.
I hope everybody can stay safe and stay healthy. It's a testimony, I think, to the weird times we live in, that it's so hard to even know what you can trust coming out of mainstream news about the virus. Sometimes hard to know how worried one should be.
Some basics though. People, wash your hands.
I was just going to say that.
Come into contact with people.
Yeah.
Bump elbows. Go ahead and don't shake hands, but by all means, please be conscious of how you can get a virus transmitted to yourself, because it happens easier than you think. And a lot of transmission can be stopped, we know, with simple hygiene.
Hand washing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the guy who literally invented hand washing for doctors, his story, right? He was the guy that basically was put in an insane asylum for thinking such a crazy thing.
No,
So
I didn't know that. No.
Doesn't make the red pill look so bad after all. I mean, he was
Yeah.
literally put in the insane asylum because
Mm-hmm.
the doctors thought he was crazy for thinking you had to wash your hands.
Yeah, you leftists out there, you might want to stop sucking your thumb.
Uh-oh, he's politicizing.
All right, on that note.
Politicizing, here I go.
Stay safe, everybody. Have a good week.
Wash those hands. We'll see you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.
Title?